Morning, everyone. As Andy said, my name's Junior. I'm a part of the leadership team here at Jubilee. And today we're continuing our Truth, Identity and Love series. And today we're in the third part of the series, which is love. And we're going to be exploring the question, how do I love as a friend? And before I kind of start to go through my sermon, I just felt like I needed to kind of point out how beautiful today's worship was. How beautiful it was for us to just gaze at Jesus and the love and the hope that we have in him. That reminder that he died on the cross. And throughout the sermon series, a phrase that has stuck with me is that God is for us. Everything that he's ever done, everything that he's ever fought for us is because he's for us. Phil brought that beautiful image about how actually it wasn't the nails that kept Jesus on the cross, but actually it was his love for us. And just that reminder of the love that he has for us is so beautiful. It's that reminder of why we get up early on a Sunday morning when we could have a lie-in. But it's that reminder that we're here to worship him and to glorify him. And it fits so well with what I'm preaching on today. And I'm just going to read from John 15, verses 9 to 13. So if I'll just give people time, it'll come up on the screen as well to turn to those pages. And John 15 says, from verse 9, "As the Lord has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And when the opportunity came to pick a topic in the sermon series, we've covered a lot of different topics, but this was the one that I wanted to do the most. It was the one that I had a burning desire and passion to speak on. And the reason being, just going back to the verse 13, Jesus says, greater love has no one than this. There is no greater love. There is nothing greater than someone would lay down his life for his friends. You know, as we saw in worship, Jesus shows this in the way he died on the cross, that he gave up his life for our sake. He laid down his life for our sake. And it's just surprising to me that I don't hear about this a lot. You know, I've been to many Sunday mornings, I've been to conferences, I've been to festivals, but I honestly can't remember one time where actually the topic of friendship has been brought up. How important it is to love people as friends. And that's so challenging because, you know, every single one of us in this room will be a friend to someone, whether we're black, we're white, we're young, we're old, we're married, we're single. Each and every single one of us are called to be friends to someone. Yet we need to elevate our view on friendship. If Jesus is actually saying, no, the greatest love that you can show is towards a friend, then our view and our elevation of friendship has to go up. And it's not just about organizationally learning how to spend more time with friends, but it's about a heart change. The same heart that Jesus had for us to die on the cross, to stay on the cross. And it wasn't the nails that kept him there, but it was the love. We must reflect that onto each other. I heard something this week that was so beautiful, that was, sometimes you have to give up good things to gain something greater. Sometimes there's good things that we've got to let go and lay down in order to gain something greater. That's what Jesus calls us to do. He calls us to lay down good things in order to surrender our lives for him. And today we're going to be looking at how Jesus calls us to surrender and lay down our life as friends. How does Jesus in his life exemplify how to be a good friend, how to love people as a friend? But before we get there, we're going to explore the question quickly: why do I need friends? Some people might be sitting here and thinking, well, why is this so important? I don't need friends. I can do this on my own. I'm strong enough to get through life on my own. And I just wanted to quickly go through the Bible and just look at 3 reasons why the Bible gives us to why we need friends. And the first one is that we're made for friendship. I've got 2 verses up there from Genesis. And so often we use these verses when we're talking about marriage. But I think when we explore and look deeper into the Bible, these verses go a lot deeper than that. You know, God Rohan brought it up already, but God is one God in three persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're in a constant community with each other, loving each other. The Father loving the Son loving the Spirit loving the Father, constantly in community. And when the Bible actually says we're made like them, we're made in their likeness, that actually means there's some aspect of that is in us, that need to be a part of community, that need to be a part of some sort of fellowship. And it's not just Christians you see this in. We see this outside in the world. People are constantly looking for community, somewhere to fit in. And there's so many various different communities that people get into. Maybe it's based around an interest or a sport or people in work. But we all long for community. We all long for that. And that's why God says it is not good for man to be alone. This is why loneliness is so painful when we're outside of community, when we're arm's length away from community. It is so painful because God's made us for friendship. God's made us to be in community, to socialize, to be together. And yes, in this context, God gives Adam a wife. But like I said, as we look through the Bible, we actually see that people in the Bible were close to others outside of romantic relationships. You look at Jonathan and David. You look at Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And you look at Jesus. Jesus was single. He never married. He never had a wife. But he wasn't alone. Why? Because he had his friends. He had his disciples that he walked through life with constantly. We look at Paul. And Paul, again, wasn't married. Yet he exemplified not being alone by having friendships. Some of his friendships are so beautiful. One of my favorite parts of the Bible, and maybe it's just me, is when Paul says in one of his letters, he says to Timothy, I left like my scroll and my cloak. Remind that person to bring it back for me. And it's so beautiful because anyone who knows me knows I leave things everywhere. But also there's that sense of friendship, there's that sense of togetherness, and they're not alone. And James Patrick spoke about it last week, that we have to reject that notion that romantic relationships are the only way for us to be close to one another. The cure to loneliness isn't to find a partner. Actually, the cure to loneliness is for us to be friends and to support and love one another. The second reason to why it's so important that we build friendship is that we need to spur each other on. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12 says this: 2 are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. In this life, we're going to come through troubles. Next slide, yeah. In this life, we're going to face trials and we're going to face struggles. Jesus goes as far as to say in John 16:33, he actually promises you're going to face hardships. You know, the Bible doesn't promise that you become and surrender your life to Jesus and on this side of eternity, your life becomes easy. He doesn't. If anything, it's the opposite. If anything, coming to Jesus, giving your life to him means that on this side of eternity, you're going to face trials. You're going to face suffering. And this is why we need friends, people beside us to spur us on, to keep going, to move forward. In Hebrews 10:24-25, and 25, Paul talks about the need for us to keep encouraging and building each other on, thinking about how we can build each other in love because we need each other. I think about my life personally, and a few months ago I left teaching, and it was a really hard time for me. And it was a time where sometimes I'd wake up and I'd feel I failed, I feel useless, I feel like I'm not helpful to God. But in those tough times, it's your friends who pick you up. It's those people who love you. It's those people who send that message that picks you up for that day and gets you through. We need to constantly be building and encouraging each other. And that leads on to a third reason. Well, why do we need to keep on encouraging each other? There's this mystery in the Bible that God is revealed through unity and love. In John 17 and in John 13, Jesus talks about this sense of when we're one, when we're united, when we're close in friendship, the world is going to know that we are his disciples. The world is going to know that the Father sent him. There's something about unity, us being together, us being close, us growing together that reflects his love. And there's some sense that the friendships and the community and the family that we build in church, the world has to look at and the world has to marvel at, like, wow, that's just so awesome. Surely God is there. Surely God is present. And I just want to say this doesn't mean that we're close with everyone, because it's not possible. It's not possible for us to share everything with everyone. You know, roughly in our church, there's about 80 people. We can't be close with each other. But what it does mean, in order to be united, in order to be one in love and looking out for another, it means, yeah, maybe there's a few people who you're really close to, but as a whole church, we're all looking out for each other. You know, Samuel looks out for Andy. Andy looks out for Andy. Andy looks out for Johnny. You know, Johnny looks out for Lydia, and it goes round, and Lydia is still looking after Samuel. We're all looking out for each other. And we might not all be close in friendship. We might not all spend loads of time together, but we're looking out for each other. We're looking out for the people who are lonely. We're looking out for the people who might be on the outskirts. It might mean on a Sunday morning taking your time to sit with that person who doesn't know anyone. You know, we see this with Jesus. Jesus only had 12 disciples. He didn't have 50, 60, 70, 80. He had 12 close friends. And even amongst those 12 friends, there was only 3 of them which he took to the mountain where he showed his true self. You look at Paul's relationship with Timothy, which was special. It was like a father and a son relationship. We don't need to be close with everyone. I don't want anyone leaving here thinking, okay, I've got to make time to spend with every single person in church. I'm going to see Johnny on Monday. I'm going to see Lauren on Tuesday. I'm going to see Samuel. That's not what this is about. What this is about is us building a community that is one and together, and we're all looking out for each other. And when I look at these reasons, so if we go back to the 3 reasons, when I look at the fact that we're made for friendship, that we need each other to keep going, to spur each other on, the fact that unity and love reflects God, it just surprises me that we don't talk about friendship often. It just surprises me so much. I'll be honest with you, in my time as a Christian, in my 8 years of a Christian, I've heard so much about relationships, I've heard so much about marriage, and it's kind of like there's this importance that's put on it. But if Jesus is saying, no, the greatest love isn't a marriage, but the greatest love actually is friendship, how much more does our importance need to be elevated? How much more do we need to spend time thinking about how do we love our friends? How do we care for other people? You know, I decided just to kind of help me inform the preach and know what I needed to kind of point at, hit at. I sent 3 questions to a range of people in the church, and I tried to make sure that people were in different groups. I sent some messages to people who are single, married, black, white, old, young, and I just kind of wanted to get an idea of, well, where are we at as a church with friendships? Where are we at in terms of building close relationships, close bonds? And what was really nice, that a few people said, yeah, I've got a lot of close friends. I've got people who I can trust. I've got people in times of loneliness are there for me. You know, one of the things that people said, and I really want to encourage us as a church, that this is one of the friendliest churches that I've ever been in. You walk in on a Sunday, a new person walks in, and there's 4, 5, 6 people going up to talk to them, to welcome them in, to make them feel loved. And everyone said this. Everyone said, well, welcoming and friendly church. But the extent that we are a friendly church doesn't extend as much during the week, outside of a Sunday morning, outside of a home group. And again, I want to say that some people do have those close friendships. I don't want to say that, we're horrible and we're completely failing at it. But there was a majority of people who said, actually, I don't feel like I have close friendships. Who said, actually, when I'm alone, I don't feel like there's anyone who I can turn to. And to be honest, when I heard that and I kind of went through those messages, it just brought sadness to my heart. It just brought sadness to my heart that we're a community together and we meet together regularly, yet there's still people who go home and say they feel desperately lonely. This is why it's so important that we think about friendship. This is why it's so important that we look out for each other, because we might be in a good place, but sometimes somebody else isn't. So let's look at that question. How do we love as a friend? How do we build a community where we're friends looking out for each other? And it's just going back to John 15 and verse 13 specifically, in the second part, when Jesus says to lay down one's life for one's friend. If there's one sentence I want us to take away from today, is that how do I love as a friend? Well, to love as a friend takes sacrifice. It requires us to sacrifice and lay down our lives for our friends. A story that I heard in the week that really challenged me was about this old lady and a younger lady, and both churchgoers. And the older lady this is not Jubilee, by the way. The older lady in the church was starting to care for the younger lady because she had mental health struggles. She was going through a really tough time. And the older lady made a decision to take it upon herself to welcome her in, to check up on her regularly. And then the older lady's friends came up to her and said, "We love what you're doing with her, but make sure you don't wear yourself out. Make sure you don't burn yourself out, loving her and caring for her. Make sure you look after yourself." And I believe those friends, their heart was in the right place, 100%. They were caring about their friend. They were worried about their friend. But the older lady went away and she sat down and she thought about it. And something didn't quite right sit about the response that her friends gave her. And she said this, which is so challenging. And the lady's response was, "If that was my daughter, would anyone have ever said that to me? If that was my child who was going through a tough time, would anyone dare say to me, don't put too much effort into your child, don't give up too much time into your child, look after yourself?" No, we would actually encourage and get beside the woman to help her to love that child. So often we love to use the word church family, but we really need to understand what that word family means, what it really means to be family, what it really means to be together. It takes sacrifice. It takes laying down our lives. The things that you would do for your own personal family, maybe your mum, your dad, your brother, your sisters, your cousin, whoever, you would give up your time. You would open your heart to them. You would try not to be selfish. Why? Because you're family. So if we're called to be family, if Jesus is calling us to lay down our lives for each other, this is how we need to love. And I picked 3 ways in which we can sacrifice, and they're all kind of based on Jesus. And this morning we were talking about the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. And that is the greatest sacrifice that's ever been made. But when you read the Bible, there's other sacrifices that Jesus made for us. There's other sacrifices that he made for his friends. And the 3 reasons are already up there. And the first one is he gave up his time and comfortability. Jesus said that he didn't have a home. He had nowhere to lay his head. And he did that for us. He didn't have a home. He didn't have a wife. He didn't have a child. Why? So he could walk around Israel and share the message of God, because he loved us. Because he wanted to invest into his disciples. Jesus showed hospitality with no home. He gave up his time. He gave up his comfortability. He loved us despite not having that. The people that society discarded, Jesus intentionally spent time with them, had dinner with them. One of the responses I got from the people that I messaged was, you really feel a part of someone's family when you have breakfast with them in the morning. There's something about staying over, waking up, and just watching a family do their routine, just watching them get up, brush their teeth. There's something about it. It's kind of like, you're pulling up the curtain and you're seeing behind their life, and you really get to know them. And I think about my own personal experiences where there've been times for various reasons why I've had to, take a room in somebody's house in the church. And I just think some of the most valuable time we spent wasn't just the deep conversations we have. Sometimes it's just when you're just being together. You just give up your time, just come over and just be. You know, maybe you're just watching something, or maybe you're just playing a game. That is valuable. Giving up our times for people to just come in and just to see how we live is so important, which is why the weekend away is so beautiful, because we have so much time to just be together, to be a family. And I just want to reiterate again, we can't build that with everyone, but we need to be intentional about building that with a few people. It takes intentionality. It takes thinking. It takes, okay, I'm going to be intentional with this one person. You know, maybe they don't have a family. I'm going to be intentional about welcoming them into mine. It might be, I know that person's going through a really hard time, so I'm going to be intentional about checking in on them. And it's not just about the big sacrifices of time, but it's also about the little ones. It's also about just texting someone, how are you doing? Just texting them a Bible verse to uplift them. Just giving them a call to check in on them for 10 minutes on the way to work, I don't know, or any other time where you just have little time to give to other people. You know, I think about the times where people have messaged me encouragement, and they message me verses that have just really built me up in that moment. Those little decisions are as important too. And the danger is if we're not intentional about our time, looking at our diaries, finding the time to spend with each other, what may happen is at some point we look around and then all of a sudden we're like, wait, I have no friends and I'm lonely. Or friendships or people that you love so much, you know, who you used to spend a lot of time with, all of a sudden you look back and you're like, wow, I haven't seen them for 6 months. I haven't spent time with them for a really long time, and we need to be intentional. And I want to challenge us that before we take the speck out of other people's eye, we take the plank out of ours. Before we look to other people and be like, well, that person isn't making time for me and that person isn't, you know, consistently investing in me. My challenge is actually, let's look at ourselves. Let's examine ourselves first. Are we making that effort consistently? Are we taking the time to check in on people? Are we taking the time to love people? Are we taking the time to invite people into our homes? You know, whether we're single, whether we're married, whether we're parents, whether we're young, whether we're old, this is a challenge for all of us to build that relationship, to sacrifice that time and comfortability. But if we just sacrifice our time and comfortability, there's a warning in Proverbs 18:24 where it says, a man of many companions comes to ruin, but there's a friend that sticks close to a brother. Sits close as a brother, sorry. So we can spend time with each other, but if we're not opening our hearts, if we're not being vulnerable, if we're not sharing our challenges, if we're not sharing our hopes, we're just having mind-to-mind conversations. You know, sometimes we're just exchanging information mind to mind. We're talking about football. We're talking about the fact that Liverpool have bottled the league. You know, we're talking about the fact that Ten Hag needs to go, or we're talking about the state of politics. And these conversations are fine. I'm not saying that we should never talk about football. To be fair, I wouldn't be against never talking about Liverpool again, but what it means is that we also need to be intentional about having heart-to-heart conversations, about being vulnerable with one another, with having people who we can truly open up ourselves to and just be ourselves without expectation. And again, Jesus exemplified this in his life in 2 ways. One of the moments I think about is in the Garden of Gethsemane. You know, Jesus intentionally brings his disciples to see that moment where he's praying to the Father, where he's sweating blood because he's so stressed and tormented about what he's going to go through for our sake. And he says, Father, if there's another way, please, but not my will, but yours. He opens himself up to us. There's also that moment when Lazarus dies and he weeps and he cries and he shows us vulnerability. You know, sometimes it's our weakness that encourages other people as much of our strength. It's not about always being strong. It's just about being our authentic self, sharing our hearts. Being intentional about letting our guard down. And being intentional about encouraging and challenging each other. Going back to that second point of why we need friendship, we need each other to keep going on this journey of living for Christ. Because what the enemy loves doing is he loves isolating us by ourselves. And those are the moments where he lies and he isolates and he lies. That's the way he does it. He separates us from each other. He makes us think that, no, I need to do this Christian walk on my own. The only way that I can be useful to God is if I stand on my own. I'm a warrior. I'm a man of God. But rather, we need to be together. We need to come together. As it says in Ecclesiastes, a cord of 3 strands is hard to break. We need to be there for each other, picking each other up, encouraging one another, building each other up, but also challenging each other when sometimes we're doing things we're not meant to, or encouraging each other further to use our giftings that God has given us. And I think about one of my closest friendships is with my old teacher who became my youth leader. And some of you may have met him or may have talked about him. And I remember every single Friday he would make the time to invite us into his home. And he was very intentional about not just opening up his home and spending time with us, but he was also very, very intentional about us spending time with his kids, us just seeing his day-to-day life. He was very intentional about encouraging us, building us up, challenging us. And he would regularly share his weaknesses, because I learned as much from his weaknesses as his strengths. And sometimes I learned just as much from just observing him rather than anything that came out of his mouth. And I look back at that period, and it's a period where I grew so much in my faith. And it wasn't just because of him, but it was also the friends and the community that we built. These are people now in my life that at any time I could call them and I would share anything with them. And the thing is, that didn't happen by accident. I didn't stumble upon close friendships. The best man at my wedding, we didn't stumble upon becoming good friends. We were intentional. We share our hearts. When I call him, one of the questions I make sure to ask him is, how is your relationship with God really going? How is life really? And we've had some difficult conversations about disappointments in life, feeling like failures, and encouraging and building each other up. Sometimes he can be mean. Sometimes he challenges me, and in the moment, I'm like, I don't want to hear this, but it's exactly what I need to spur me on to keep going. So we need to be intentional about opening up our hearts. We need to be intentional about not hiding away our shortcomings, not making our houses super squeaky clean and tidy so people think we have everything in order, because none of us do. None of us are perfect. Not a single person in here. And we can't be passive. This is two-way. You can't just sit there and think other people are going to be open with me, but not open up to other people. We all need to be actively pursuing, laying down our lives and sacrificing for the sake of friendship. And the last point is, we need to give up our selfishness. We need to stop being selfish. We need to become selfless. As Christ was selfless, to come down on the earth and to die for us on the cross is the same way we need to be selfless. The same way that Christ so often thought about others before he thought about himself. The way that Christ laid down his life. The way that Christ loved us, we need to reflect this. And this isn't just actions, but this is a heart position. This is a position of our heart. Everything that I'm saying today isn't just simply about the eldership team or the leadership team now organizing things in a way to make sure that every single, like putting up a big chart and, we're going to make sure that everyone is in someone's house at some point in the week. It's not about that. It's about our hearts changing. It's about our hearts becoming selfless, thinking about ourselves less and thinking more about others. Our hearts being prone to... No, I'm going to think about today. I'm going to think about how I can encourage Andrew. How can I build him up? How can we build that friendship, that brotherhood? Maybe that's a text, maybe that's a call, but it's being intentional. And again, I just want to say that it isn't easy. It's hard, and it takes bravery and it takes faith. Some of you might think that. Naturally, I'm comfortable around people. I'm not. Every single time I go to talk to a new person, or every single time I go to talk to someone, I get nervous, I get anxious. But I have to overcome that because it's not about me, it's about other people. I have to overcome that because that person that's sitting there alone, they just need someone to sit with them. I have to overcome that because there's brothers that I've got in this church that we've got close relationship with that I need to keep building and keep building and keep building. And sometimes somebody may leave the church that we were super close to and we've got to start again. And it's not easy, and which is why we're going to spend some time this morning just worshiping, but also just praying. What Jesus is calling us to in terms of stepping up and loving each other and laying down our lives for each other, it doesn't happen like this. It's not a quick fix. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes intentionality. Does the band want to come up? I've just left us in the last slide with some practical points of how we can work this out, how we can live this out. Sorry. And I've just put some practical points because, yes, it's important that, first of all, we look to the heart change, but I just wanted to practically just give some pointers about how do I build friendship. And the first one that I've put there is getting involved in a home group, where we meet in smaller groups, where we open up our hearts, where we talk about deeper questions. And if you do, please, I encourage you, get involved, get around people constantly, attend regularly to church. You know, the home group leaders are me and Lauren and the McCalls in one group, the Gunasekharas in another group. We've got the Burwells and the Ritters in another group. And then we've got Carl and we've got Charlotte who aren't here. So I'm going to say to go to the Stamens. And just talk to them about getting involved in these smaller communities that we have to build each other up. Sorry. Yeah, go for it. Secondly, get your calendars out and meet with people. Think about where can I fit people in? Where can I actually invite people into my life? And this can be one-to-one, this can be in groups. But take that brave step of faith. I know it's scary, but faith isn't the absence of fear. Faith is taking that step despite the fear. And lastly, make the effort to just check in on someone this week. It might just be a message, it might just be a call. Step out, make that effort. You see, all of this love that we're called to show. Jesus, I just want to go back. I just want to go back to John 15. In verse 11, Jesus says, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Jesus challenges us on this because he wants what's best for us. He wants our joy to be complete. And some of us might be scared or afraid, but just remember, God wants what's best for you. God is for you. God is for your joy. And God wants you maybe to lay down something that's good, but I promise you he's going to give you something that's better. Let's worship.